As a complexity scientist, I love to study markets, whether they're natural ecosystems or business ecosystems. And today we're going to talk about something really fun. It's one of my favorite topics, which is how to build $1 billion startup almost overnight. And what I realized when I studied natural markets, I realized that the natural ecosystems are very similar to business ecosystems, whatever they are, whatever sector or industry. And there's certain dynamics that play out over and over again in a natural ecosystem as they do in a business ecosystem. So what I realized is that in order, if you want to build $1 billion startup overnight, well, almost overnight, like I said, is that you have to look at patterns within a market, whatever that market is. And what I realized is there are certain patterns that play out over and over again that I want to share with you, because obviously I'm also interested in building a $1 billion startup overnight. So here's what I looked at. I analyzed them, and I looked at it from a pattern perspective, and that's what you do as a complexity scientist, because you're studying nonlinear systems. So you're always looking at simple rules that evolve and create complex patterns. So if you're looking at it as the market evolves, you might see a lot of complexity, whatever the market is, whether it's a natural ecosystem or business. But in reality, there's simple patterns that play out. And so some of the things that I looked at, and we're going to do some mathematics today. Obviously, you don't have to know any math. We're going to do some actually graphing some stuff. But 5 common themes, or 5 different things that I've seen patterns play out is, first one is that if you want to build $1 billion startup almost overnight, you have to build a new market on top of an existing market. That's one, and I'll go into full detail later. The second one is you want to surf the market expansion, and that sometimes happens, not all the time, but depending on the pattern, if you see it, then you want to surf that market expansion, and I'll go into full detail. The third one is one of my favorites, which is ride the market. So if the market is going up, you want to ride it, and then it's a matter of when you exit. And what I mean by exit, either get acquired or go IPO. The fourth one is actually very interesting, and I will discuss a great entrepreneur that's actually intersected 2 of these 5 patterns, and we'll get to that next. But the fourth one is launching into market intersection, and of course the fifth one is what happens a lot in Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley, is attacking a market and making it more frictionless. And usually that happens when you're taking an analog service or product and converting it into a digital product. And a perfect example is the music industry. We went from 8-track to cassettes to CDs to now everything is digital, and all these different business models are coming out. For example is Spotify, streaming service, or Pandora. And so what you're looking at is when you're creating a frictionless market, you're reducing the inefficiency in that market, which means that you're reducing the cost of whatever that is. So in the music business, you're actually making the distribution component frictionless because it's digital, bits and bytes. I mean, you cannot compete with that. So what happens is the cost of distribution is reduced. And now, because it's reduced, now you can actually expand the entire market, and that's really what's happening on the digital music front. And of course, when you create a frictionless market, then what you're doing is you're actually increasing the transparency of whatever that is. And by increasing the transparency, you're enabling people to also collaborate, for example. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some mathematics, really fun stuff. And we won't even use numbers, because to me, numbers are really irrelevant. What you have to look at is the acceleration and deceleration of markets and how that plays out. So I'm going to take this off right now, and I'm going to draw it for you, because I think the best way to do it is, I could have just drawn it on the board, but I want to show it to you. And as I'm doing it, then we can learn together. So the first one we're going to talk about is building a new market on top of an existing market. And that was the first one I wrote about, building a new market. Okay, and the best way for me always to look at it, because I look at patterns, you don't really need to know really sophisticated math. I mean, algebra, calculus, you don't need to know actually anything about that. You can actually just look at it visually. So building a new market on top of an existing market is something that happens quite often. And I'm going to give you two categories. So for instance, if you do the simple XY coordinates, and one of the things that you're going to see is that a lot of the natural ecosystems, a lot of things actually depends on a bell-shaped curve. Okay, and there's a great book written by Jeffrey Moore, Inside the Tornado, that he talks about the bell-shaped curve in terms of customer adoption or product adoption or innovation. And so what happens is a lot of the products, services, they do deal with the bell-shaped curve. But some of the things do play out differently when it's a new market, because an evolving market, like I said, is like a non-linear system, so it's quite unpredictable. So what happens is that if you have a category that's an existing category, it's made a lot of money, and it's a huge category. Let's talk about fast food industry. You got McDonald's, you got Wendy's, Taco Bell, and all those different chains that make Burger King, that make a lot of money. But one of the cool things you can do is you can actually create a new category, okay, and it's really not a subcategory of the curve. So it's really not creating something within it. And this new category, as an example, is called fast casual dining, okay? And you know, what's phenomenal about fast casual dining is the leader in that was Chipotle. I remember when I lived in Silicon Valley, and my kids made me go and eat at Chipotle. And the first time out, I was like, wow, I mean, this is good. But to me, it seemed like it was expensive considering the layout and all that. And now I'm actually a huge Chipotle fan. And the reason is because they've kind of recombined fast food with casual dining, and they created a simple solution. Okay, of course, they added the organic components to it and all that. But one of the key things that it's really interesting about Chipotle is that their menu really hasn't changed that much over the last 10, 15 years. And so what they did was they created a fast casual dining category. So you could say that within this bell-shaped curve, you had the fast food industry, and they've been stagnant to some extent. Obviously, the expansion of McDonald's and Pizza Hut and all these places, that has happened because of international markets. But if you look at the sector within America as an example, it has had majorly a bell-shaped curve, and of course it's really a matter of where each one of these players sits on the bell-shaped curve. So a new player, so one of the things, if you're a startup, okay, which Chipotle was, can ride, okay, you build on top of the existing market, and you create a new category, okay? And that's really cool. Another really cool company, which I'm a huge fan of, is Whole Foods, okay? What they've done, I mean, the grocery business has been around forever. It's always going to be forever. We all have to eat. But what they've done is something really cool. They created an organic-based, and you know, most of their products, and they're pretty good at this, they're actually excellent at it, is it's organic based, and they try to keep it that way and healthy. A grocery store. So you know, in Texas, you have Randall's, you have Kroger, and of course Walmart came in with their grocery format, and Target and so on. But bottom line is that organic based grocery was created by Whole Foods. And if you notice something about both of these companies, they're both public, they're billion-dollar enterprises. So what they did was they rode on top of an existing market. They created a new category. And so what I wanted to write down on this is that this is Market X, okay? He could be anything. And I'm telling you, because of the complexity science principles of nonlinear systems, you can tell that one of the ways to create $1 billion startup almost overnight is to create a new category within an existing category, and that's what they've done. And so this is the first way of looking at an idea, whatever your idea is, and looking at it from perspective is, how do I create a new category on top of an existing category? Because what happens is that if you're doing it on top of an existing category, it's easier to explain to the consumer why they should buy it. And That's very critical, because if you're a startup, it doesn't matter how much money you have, okay, you're going to have to spend money, time and effort and all that, educating the consumer why they should buy the alternative, whatever that alternative is. So this is the first market pattern that I've seen. It plays out all the time. People create a new category. The category, for whatever reason, whatever the structural dynamics of the subsector, they just take off. And of course, fast casual dining was, right now in hindsight, is like, gee, Chipotle was the first to invent that. Yeah, their food is high quality, okay, and they make it easy and they make it quick for you to go through the line, pick what you want, sit down and eat. So it's a beautiful formula, and of course they're having, you have copycats come out now in different types of food sectors, copying Chipotle as an example. And one of the things that I could say is in regards to Whole Foods is that you've got other players right now attacking the organic market. So you've got Sprouts. Sprouts is a very cool chain because they try to focus on giving you less SKUs, less offerings, but the price is really good, and they do try to keep within that organic feel. The other one that I think is doing a really good job, and they're, in my opinion, maybe a little less organic, is Central Market. Very good stuff, very good products, great pricing, probably better pricing, a little bit better pricing than Whole Foods, but still they're riding that healthy, conscious wave of the consumers, so they don't have to educate the market. And the irony is that Whole Foods was the company, from my perspective, that educated the consumers, the average consumer, the benefit of buying healthy food, local food. And on that note, we'll go to the next pattern that I've seen in regards to how to build a billion-dollar company overnight. And so the next pattern is serve to market expansion.